Our club has always been a forum for public figures, thought leaders, and decision makers to share their ideas. Here, we offer access to dynamic political, business, and public personalities.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good afternoon, members and guests. Good afternoon, members and guests. There's this really cool thing called the internet, and we are now live streamed. I was going to say around the world, but it's really across Canada. Well, it is around the world, because Al has a team in Houston, right, Al? So there's probably some people down there, and Europe. So we're around the world. My name's David Simmons. I'm president of the Canadian Club Toronto and your host for today. My colleague and my colleague, friend, and fellow board member, Tanya Van Biesen, will be at the podium later today to thank our guest. But first, let me say that despite the pandemic, we've been able to adapt and offer a robust calendar of events in this, our 125th season of the club. Today's special guest and the conversation facilitator represent our continuing desire to bring you engaging leaders on topics of interest and importance to Canadians. Our level of engagement with members and guests has increased significantly because of our online presence. Hundreds of guests have registered for today's event and are joined us online. We appreciate you being with us and welcome you to the room. For those of you joining us virtually, you can engage on social media. There are hashtags currently on your screen. For those of you in the room, there are hashtags on your tables. Please tweet, Instagram, Facebook. Hey, Vince, how are you? If you have questions for the President and CEO of Enbridge, you can use the Q&A cards on your table, or you can click Submit a Question online, and we will retrieve some of those questions and curate them for the moderator. I'd like to acknowledge today's event sponsors, Aecon, represented by John Beck, and EY, represented by Kent Caulfield. Your generous support help us keep the club running, help us have guests in the room, and put on the program that we put on. At this time, I'd like to invite Kent, who's been a good partner of ours over the entire season. He's the ESG market leader and Chief Sustainability Officer for EY, to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here. I'm based in Calgary, and Al and I were just sitting at the table saying it's so nice to be on the road again, connecting with our networks across Canada. The last thing you said to me is, don't make a hockey joke, Kent, it's too soon. So I won't. It's too soon, way too soon, way too soon. I know, we feel for you. Listen, energy is and will continue to be at the crux of the sustainability discussion. For the foreseeable future, there are two poles of global energy transition meeting the rising demand for energy while taking meaningful steps to curb climate change. Walking that tightrope between the two poles is absolutely critical to ensuring we progress against the decarbonization efforts, all while furthering Canada's position on the global stage as a safe, reliable, and sustainable provider of energy to attract foreign investment and the talent that builds social and economic growth for our entire country. And of course, more recently, energy security is a topic that's on everyone's mind. So we're honored today, and I'm honored to listen to Al Monaco, President and CEO of Enbridge, join us and listen to him speak. As the leader in North American energy infrastructure, Enbridge knows they have an important role to play in providing access to low-carbon energy. They have made very strong commitments to integrating environment, social, and governance principles into their strategy and their decision-making, and acknowledge that ESG is core to their long-term value and resistance. In November 2020, Enbridge became the first midstream company in Canada and North America's largest energy transportation company to commit to achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. To get there, they're investing in modernization, innovation, and greening the grid, as they say, and holding leadership accountable by tying compensation directly and stable financing to ESG progress. On the social lens, they're focused on creating a diverse and inclusive workplace and building lasting and productive relationships with all the communities in which they operate. They've accelerated board diversity targets to achieve representation of 40% of women and 20% of racial and ethnic groups by 2025, and are increasing representation of Indigenous peoples in their workforce to 3.5% by 2025. Enbridge is also committed to a strong and sustainable corporate governance, which promotes long-term interests and shareholders, strengthens the accountability of their board and management, and builds stakeholder and public trust. They have a great track record of robust reporting, having published their annual sustainability report for over 20 years. In fact, this is their 21st year. And they've issued the first and only focused report on Indigenous relationships and released a standalone report on climate in 2019, aligned to the recommendations of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD as we know it. It's very clear that Enbridge is changing the game in ESG, and Al has been the primary driver behind that effort. Appointed as President, Chief Executive Officer, and Director in 2012, Al has led Enbridge through a period of unprecedented growth, combined with a continued focus on safety, reliability, and environmental protection. Al is a champion of the North American energy industry and its ability to be a global leader by supplying affordable, reliable, and responsible energy for the world. He's a strong advocate for building a diverse and inclusive working environment as well. We're also very fortunate today to have him joined by the Honourable Brian Tobin, Vice Chair of BMO Financial, to moderate the discussion. Brian has served as a federal Minister of Industry, prior to which he served as the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. Brian was named as an Officer of the Order of Canada in 2013 for his contributions to Canadian public policy as both a federal and provincial politician, and for supporting economic development in Newfoundland and Labrador. It's going to be a great discussion. As a leader in ESG, recognized by Verdantix as the top sustainability program strategy, climate change strategy, and risk and governance performance management provider, we're honored that EY could be part of today's events. Conversations like this are really important to spark meaningful action that helps us build a better working world together. So Al, over to you.
Thanks, Kent. I really hope after that I don't disappoint everybody with my remarks. But just as a clarification, it was Kent that brought up the hockey issue. Again, Edmonton is playing the Flames tonight, round 2 playoff game. Perhaps not a great way to start. When this opportunity to be here came up a few months ago, I was pretty excited about it, and I still am today, but perhaps for a different reason. And we're in a different world today. So now this gives me a chance to talk about the critical issue of the day, and I'm going to get to that. For all of us, this return to normal has been thrown off the rails. We've got rocketing inflation, high energy prices, a looming recession, battered supply chains, and now a growing food supply crunch, and of course, an incomprehensible war in Ukraine. And this is not how we planned to come out and the return from the COVID crisis. So I'm going to talk about energy today, not because that's the business I'm in, but because it's even more important in this new world. Energy pervades everything we do. It drives our economies and competitiveness, and it's the essence of our social well-being. People that know me know that I'm not prone to be dramatic, but I will be emphatic about this one, which is we have just crossed a major inflection point in energy markets, and we are for sure in an energy crisis. Even if the war ends tomorrow, this is going to be a different energy market going forward. So before the discussion that we have with Brian here, I'm going to set a bit of context around a couple things, which is how we got to this inflection point, and equally important, the outsized role that Canada, and actually this is North America, can play in the future of global energy and the transition itself. So now, to anchor the themes that I just mentioned there, it might be useful just to provide a little bit of perspective on where we come from. So at Enbridge, we see ourselves as what we used to call a Canadian champion. And by the way, Brian Tobin is another Canadian champion. Thank you for being here today, Brian. So a Canadian champion, but as was mentioned by Ken, we're the largest midstream infrastructure player in North America. More than half of our assets are actually south of the border. We've invested $100 billion in the last 10 years alone. So we know a little bit about how, or sometimes not, how to get things done in North America. Our mix is diversified asset-wise, and we serve the biggest markets. So 170 million people in the U.S. Northeast, Southeast, and the Pacific Northwest. We got 15 million people that we serve in Ontario and Quebec. And we move, by the way, 2/3 of Canada's oil exports across the border. But we started building our wind and solar business roughly 20 years ago. And we invested $8 billion. And now we're a leader, we believe, in terms of hydrogen, renewable natural gas, and soon to be carbon capture. We're putting $4 billion more to work in renewables through 2025, including 3 mega-scale offshore wind projects in Europe, adding to our current 3. And we're now building the first floating offshore wind project off the south coast of France. We're the first in our sector, as we mentioned, to set interim targets on emissions, and we're actually down 27% on intensity and 20% absolute emissions since 2018, and we are the recognized ESG leader in the space. All of this hopefully gives you some insight, and us a lot of insight, into what the global energy fundamentals are actually looking like. And hopefully, again, it gives you some sense of how we're approaching the energy markets today. And in essence, it's about providing energy to the needs of what people look for every day in their lives, but building at the same time a bridge to what the future of energy is going to look like. So with that backdrop, a bit of history here. For much of time, the world has been obsessed with finding enough energy. And that's to, of course, improve our standard of living and fuel industrial growth. Energy was really scarce back long ago, and we weren't honestly very fussy about where it came from or how it got there. As long as it delivered heat, we could fill up our cars and planes and make the products that we use every day. New technology in the energy space changed all of that, and I think everybody's familiar with the shale revolution, and it really unleashed massive, massive unconventional reserves. That led to incredible abundance, which translates to cheap and reliable energy. And that, in turn, gave consumers the power to choose what energy they wanted, and increasingly, they wanted cleaner energy, more sustainable energy. So, in a way, consumers want low-cost, reliable, and clean energy, and they want the whole package. And of course, the customer is always right. Now, as sentiment started to shift and the energy transition leapt forward, a conundrum started to emerge. And this is really important. How do you meet global energy demand while limiting the planet's warming to well below 2 degrees? Because both of those, I think we'd all agree, are musts. It's challenging, actually, when you think about it, when draws on energy are certain to increase. It's a given because we're moving to a population of 10 billion. We have greater urbanization, more people in cities, more power, more computers, etc. And developing countries want to improve their own living standards, and who can blame them for that? Pre-Ukraine, reconciling these realities was the major goal, and we moved in the right direction. Governments implemented energy efficiency policies. We're pricing carbon directly or through regulation. That's the other way to price carbon. Carbon markets are developing slowly, but they're getting there. And capital is flowing to low carbon sectors. And companies are setting net zero targets. The biggest change that I've noticed is the industry really doesn't need to be convinced anymore that we need to lower emissions. In fact, if you just look at Alberta, the industry there has reduced their footprint by roughly 36% versus 2000. So all that to say that I think everybody gets it now. As the recovery started, the energy demand supply gap, this is sort of end of last year, beginning of this year, started to widen. Not enough supply, more demand. And of course, what happens? Prices go up. Now, normally, supply responds to those kinds of signals, price signals, but that didn't happen this time. We can talk about why later. But essentially, severe underinvestment in both conventional and low carbon energy is the main culprit. And what happens then? Exacerbated inflation caused pain at the pump and increased home, fuel, and electricity prices. Now, the moment that Russia invaded Ukraine, we reached what we're calling the inflection point. That single event dramatically brought energy security back into the spotlight where it hadn't been for decades, and now it's right alongside affordability, reliability, and climate. Now, this inflection point, and this is perhaps the main takeaway here today, means that energy markets will now need to reflect what I call a national security risk premium in two ways. First, putting the economic growth drivers aside, we're going to need more energy than we thought pre-Ukraine. And I think of that as sort of the energy security supply buffer that we're going to need from now on to manage that national security risk. Second, we're going to need to see greater diversification of sources of supply to more reliable providers, and we know why that is. So we will need to manage the security risk issue with an energy supply buffer and greater diversification. That really is the bottom line. The impact of this inflection point is going to be very broad, and it's going to be global, regardless of what happens in the war, even if it ends tomorrow. This will not go away anytime soon. So right about now, you probably expect me to say, well, of course, Al, we need more oil and gas, right? That's why you're here. That's partially true. But the reality is we need both conventional and low carbon supply to increase, and we need it to happen a lot faster than pre-Ukraine. At the same time, though, our climate goals are, of course, not negotiable. In my view, any way you look at this, and this is part of the answer, natural gas is an incredibly important part of the worsening conundrum that I alluded to earlier. Even before the war, and not many people gather this, Europe amended its clean energy definition to include natural gas. Nobody had thought about that prior to this. The fact is that natural gas is the key, and I look at it as the key enabler to renewables. Why is that? Because it's highly effective in managing the load variability that's inherent in wind and solar. So that's the story with natural gas. And if you think about it, the U.S. has expedited its LNG exports right away. And volumes are now expected to be probably 3 times higher than they are today 20 years from now. On low carbon, $25 trillion will need to be invested, with renewables comprising the lion's share of that, of course, but it's going to need RNG, we're going to need hydrogen, we're going to need carbon capture and conservation. All of those have to happen. So point being is today we are woefully underinvested in both conventional and low carbon energy. So let me just expand one moment. If we're going to meet the Paris goals and assure energy security and reliability, we simply have to embrace all forms of energy. The key is to leverage the existing infrastructure that we already have. Let me just give you a couple of examples because I think that best explains it. So down the road, well, a little bit further than just down the road, in Markham, we're piloting a first-of-its-kind green hydrogen facility out there in Markham. There we're going to produce hydrogen from renewables and blend it into our natural gas system. So we're able to actually heat homes and power industry with hydrogen, clean energy. Now, as a company that moves 20% of all the gas consumed in North America and about 10% of the gas that goes offshore through exports, just imagine blending even 10% hydrogen and what that could do in terms of lowering emissions. At our Ingleside export terminal in the Gulf Coast, this is at Corpus Christi, we're adding on-site solar to power our facility there. And we will actually be net negative emissions. And the exciting part to this, which we're just developing now, is a hydrogen and ammonia project that will export clean energy. We're working on multiple renewable natural gas projects. Essentially, those capture methane from landfills as just one example, displacing conventional gas. We're building solar farms at our pumps and compressors along our pipeline right-of-way, so powering our business with renewable energy. We're developing another exciting part of the business. We're developing a carbon capture hub in Alberta that should eliminate 4 megatons annually of CO2 from cement and power industries. And again, the best part about that is we'll be investing alongside 5 Indigenous groups. So imagine co-ownership of important critical infrastructure. Now, this inflection point also means another thing, that North America will play a much bigger role in global energy markets, and here's why I say that. This continent produces energy more reliably, sustainably, and at lower cost than anywhere else. As Canada and US systems are highly integrated, there's pipes and transmission lines that cross the border in both directions. The system's highly integrated. So we have a continental energy system here. So what happens is when you grow US exports, it's a great opportunity for Canada to jump in and fill that gap. Example, give you just a couple numbers here. The break-even price to produce and export LNG in Canada and the US is between $6 to $8 an MMBTU. That compares to a price of $30 plus in Asia and Europe in the first quarter. The economics are just half of the story, though. If you look at the ESG scores for the 10 largest producers of energy globally, Canada and the US are number 1 and number 2. This explains why LNG in the US Gulf Coast is booming. And the US will likely be the largest LNG exporter by the end of this year. That happened strikingly fast. It was just in 2016 when the United States was a net importer of LNG. They've turned it around that quickly. They're moving quickly here to actually address what's happening in the global energy crisis. Now, Canada missed the first LNG window, so we are behind, no doubt about that. But we can catch up. That's the good news. Canadian companies are every bit as good as US companies in terms of developing natural gas, technology, cost, and sustainability-wise. And proximity to Asia gives us a 2 to 4 week shipping advantage. And that creates a huge advantage relative to the US Gulf Coast exports. And it's colder in Canada, which is helpful in the case of LNG exports. Other than one project, the first, which is LNG Canada, and that's not scheduled to come in until 2025, we have not been able to capitalize on our advantages in this country, mainly because of the challenges in building infrastructure. Equally important, and this may be even more important, we've yet to embrace the fact that Canadian energy can have a significant impact on reducing global emissions. Canada is already leading the rest of the world on the 1.5% of global emissions created within our borders. But if we really want to lead the transition, then Canada has got to look and set its sights higher on the 98.5% of emissions that are created outside of Canada. And just a reminder here, the single biggest factor that has led to the U.S. being able to reduce its emissions by 20% since 2005 has been, guess what? Natural gas. It's similar here in Ontario, where we've been able to replace coal-fired generation with gas, renewables, and hydro. This Canadian formula can be replicated globally. And just get this, China, for example, has 1,100 coal plants and growing each day. And I won't even get into the other parts of the world that are still using a lot of coal for generation. We should be proud of the fact that LNG Canada will have 35% lower emissions than the world's best facilities. By leveraging our clean electricity system, the cleanest in the world, at 80% non-emitting sources, we can make LNG even cleaner. And there's another prize here. Exporting affordable, sustainable, secure energy comes with a huge opportunity to advance Indigenous reconciliation in this country. And Chief Councillor Crystal Smith of the Haisla in BC said something to the effect, I won't get it exactly the quote, but LNG affords Indigenous people a share and a say in how energy is developed in the future. So I'm going to sum up because I know we want to get to the discussion. We are clearly in an energy crisis. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. The inflection point that we just crossed, though, means that energy security and affordability will matter a lot more than it used to, and that will now be on the same level as climate and reliability. Global supply needs to grow and grow faster than it did before and provide the security and diversification buffer to meet demand and ensure that we have a sustainable future. We need to ramp up investment in both conventional and low-carbon energy. That's a given. And the North American advantage existed before Russia invaded Ukraine, and now is the time to use this North American advantage. So today, we're in a great position on this continent to gain global market share. We've got the resources, skills, and technology. We're focused on lowering emissions, and we're developing the right incentives to promote hydrogen, RNG, and carbon capture. Now in Canada, it's clear that we need to capitalize on our own advantage. We have a world-class energy system and the know-how to export the most sustainable energy worldwide. That means, as one leg of the stool, getting serious about natural gas exports. And that can make a real difference both in terms of energy emissions and security. We can leverage our existing energy infrastructure systems. That's a must. And that's a good way to bridge what we need to do for the energy future. We can do all of this, by the way, and this is the big plus in it all, by advancing Indigenous reconciliation right here in Canada. So, bottom line is, the time has come to take a fresh look at Canada's role in the global energy transition. The responsibility and the opportunity is today, and we simply need to get after it. Canada is one of the lowest cost, most reliable, and sustainable global energy providers, and that's exactly what the world needs today and what it's going to need in the future. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you for listening, and we'll now move on to the Q&A. Do
you want some water?
I'm good.
Yep.
Thank you.
There you go. You can come up for help.
All right. Thanks, Kent.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here.
Al, delighted to be here, and thank you for your kind words. Look, as you know, I used to be a politician way back a long time ago.
I remember that.
20 years ago, actually. But now I'm a banker, so I just cut right to the chase. And by the way, I'm a shareholder.
Great.
So,
Stay that way.
10 years, exceptional leadership by any measure, by you and by your team. And I'm just noting 16 years of achieving guidance, without a break, 27 years of consecutive dividend growth, leading your sector in total shareholder return, 40+ diversified sources of cash flow. We bankers really love that. That's really good. 95% of customers are investment grade, and 98% are cost of service contracted. I mean, that's a pretty rock solid foundation for a company that really is the leader in North America in your space. Congratulations.
I appreciate you saying that.
And
you
to
know,
your team.
you did acknowledge the team, and the team is over here actually today, and you know, they had to show up.
Well, it is pay for performance, right?
Anyway, they've done an amazing job, and thank you for acknowledging them.
Look, I found your remarks really interesting and quite, on the one hand, inspirational, on the other hand, perhaps a little provocative, because I remember when I was Premier of Newfoundland in '96, I came in, there had been years of negotiation on Hibernia. The deal hadn't been done. Newfoundland, because of the history of Churchill Falls, had a view that a mega project had to solve all the social and economic problems of Newfoundland, and that was kind of the basis of negotiation. And of course, the negotiation went on forever because no one project can solve anybody's social or economic problems. And I said to our team, Al, within 6 months, we need to put a generic regime in place. No more one-off negotiations on a single project. Let's put firm and clear rules in place, and if the rules are clear enough and the incentive's strong enough, capital will show up. And within 6 months, we did Hibernia, we did Terra Nova, we did White Rose. $15 to $20 billion of capital flowed in a very short period of time. So my question to you, because you have been a proponent of important infrastructure for Canada and for Canadian resources, and you've been frustrated in some of those pursuits. My question for you today is, given what's happened with Russia's aggression, Russia's war in Ukraine, given the reality that Europe knows it cannot rely upon Russia as a secure source of energy, and as you said, the world's changed. Doesn't matter if the war ends, the supply equation does not end. The insecurity of energy does not end. Should we in Canada be re-looking at the posture we've taken to this point in time, not about carbon reduction, but about the regulatory framework that currently is in place, and does it allow us to participate in, as you talked about, Canada's contribution to global energy security of supply, given our current regulatory framework? Big question, but
there's a lot in that.
Nobody's better able to answer this question than you.
You know, I have to say, you mentioned one critical point there, the ability to attract capital. And in the end, that's probably the most critical issue here. And let me first say that on the regulatory front, which is, you know, often a target of bashing in this country and other countries, there is no doubt that the industries that are involved in energy infrastructure are firmly committed to environmental protection. We will live up to the highest possible standards on that front. Reason for that being we need community support. We want to do the right thing when it comes to protecting the water and land. We want to engage with Indigenous communities and communities more generally. So we have the highest standards as an industry, I believe, Brian. The reality is that in terms of attracting capital, our regulatory framework does cause problems. And it's not that the standards are too onerous. It's that we need more clarity in terms of how we're able to execute. So, you know, these days, infrastructure projects can take anywhere from 10, 12, maybe even longer years to execute. And so if you think about the amount of effort and capital that needs to go into the development of a regulatory application, it could take literally hundreds of millions of dollars. We experienced this with Northern Gateway. Tech Resources experienced it over even a longer period, investing literally hundreds of millions of dollars to get regulatory approval. We get regulatory approval, lots of boxes checked, and then the project gets canceled. So the dilemma is, do infrastructure companies who are responsible to shareholders and other stakeholders, Can they really afford to invest hundreds of millions of dollars, get a regulatory check mark, and then have the project canceled? So the regulatory process itself can work, and the standards, I think, need to be appropriately tough. But I think there needs to be clarity, and here's what I mean. The way the regulatory process used to work is you'd have independent science-based regulation, which rules were prescribed for, and if you followed those rules and you met those tough thresholds, you could be secured in your view that, okay, the investment dollars I'm putting to work are well spent because the project is likely to get approved. Not necessarily, because the regulator may say no. But once you rely on regulation as a positive step, and then other factors enter into that process to essentially negate all the capital you spent, well, you're only going to do that once. So that is, in essence, the dilemma we're facing. So the short answer is yes, we need to look at regulatory and permitting in the context of greater transparency, greater clarity, and more defined timelines.
So we should hope and expect there will be a dialogue between industry and government in light of what's happening today on a geopolitical basis, to ask ourselves how Canada can play a more complete role, a full role, in meeting the needs of energy supply in Europe. I have to tell you, I find it incredible to reflect upon the reality that the United States has gone from a net importer of gas only a few years ago to one of the largest exporters of gas in the world in a handful of years.
Yeah.
And during the same period of time, we've been unable to get much happening other than one project, which won't come on board for a few more years, in Canada. So I think, and I know there's great interest on the East Coast as well as, of course, the West Coast, well established. Realistically, Al, can we expect to see some of these projects that got long lead time? They won't happen hopefully they won't happen during the course of the Russian-Ukraine conflict, but can we expect that Canada, through our regulatory framework and capital in Canada and know-how in Canada, will say, it's not enough to be a Boy Scout and stand aside, while our good friends south of the border are building an entire industry. We're standing, twiddling our thumbs and missing not only the opportunity, but the obligation to be part of the solution.
Right. Well, first of all, on the Gulf Coast, they do have a natural inherent advantage. Doesn't explain all of it, as we were talking about, but you're dealing with brownfield expansion. So once you're there, you're in an industrialized area. It is easier versus building greenfield in the West Coast or East Coast for the most part. But I actually am optimistic. And the reason for that, Brian, is the projects that you're seeing develop now, although they'll take some more time, they can get commercial underpinning. And that comes from demand commitments from Europe and Asia. You're starting to really see those perk up. They're looking at our gas on the West Coast and the East Coast and saying, you know what? This is reliable supply from Canada. That has got to be a big plus. They're looking at the cost of that supply versus, as I said in my remarks, the value of natural gas globally. So there's a huge economic gap there that both producers and buyers can capitalize on. So I think that's positive. And the projects that we're talking about that are probably closest here, probably smaller, bite-sized, and can utilize existing infrastructure. So for example, we have what we call a big header system. So think about north-south pipeline from the top of BC to the bottom. And once you have that pipe in the ground, as we call it, that has a huge advantage because you're not having to build greenfield. So that expansion capability is a big plus, and you're needing simply to connect to the West Coast. Now, it's not going to be easy, but I am more encouraged today for sure than I have been in the past.
You told us during your remarks that you have been investing in renewables, and the company's been doing so for 20 years. How does a company that started as an oil pipeline company end up in the renewable business? And what does it speak, what should we assume about the future investment profile?
Well, you know, when we used to visit shareholders, I know you've done the same thing, 20 years ago, we'd be talking across the table and they'd ask the exact same question, like, what are you guys doing building wind farms and solar farms? It sort of comes down to, in our business, we build infrastructure, but in the end, what we really have to understand is energy supply and demand fundamentals. And at the time, now we weren't smarter than everybody else, but we did see the fact that we were going to have more renewable energy. That was a given. The question we had to ask ourselves is, how do we play that? And so the way we did it at the time was what we called creating optionality in our business. So what can we invest in with low risk that ensures that we can get our return on and of capital in a way that doesn't bet the company? And we started small. We built projects that had contracts behind them so people would take the power. And that's how we built the business. And at the same time, we were able to develop our skills. We had some good joint venture partners, including in Europe. And we started to accumulate a portfolio. Yeah. And so when you really get down to it, Brian, it comes down to what are the fundamentals telling you about energy supply and demand? And as to the future, I think it's very clear that having this capability today is a big plus for us because we now need to grow it beyond that. Now, you have to be careful because the renewables business these days is, we call it very frothy, which means that people are putting a lot of capital into it. So you've got to be careful not to be overextending yourself on projects that don't make economic sense.
Let me ask you this question. Does the historically challenging regulatory environment that you've operated through in Canada cause, and I just think about, I can just imagine sitting around the boardroom table, discussing where you're going to deploy capital. To what extent should we in Canada have a concern, given the rapid buildup, for example, in the LNG side in the Gulf, that we're going to see more and more of the capital that you can deploy? You're now in Europe with wind farms, more and more of that going south of the border because you're able to deploy it there, as opposed to here.
That's a reality, Brian. I think that's already happening. There's first of all, we're a player in Canada, and we always will be. And the energy fundamentals in this country are just about second to none. So, but the reality is, because of the regulatory challenges, capital does flow more to the U.S., I would say. Back in 2016, we did a very large acquisition of a U.S. company that was driven not by the fact that it was U.S., but by the fact that we believed in natural gas, as I was saying earlier. And by the way, we have a massive utility here in Toronto. By the way, if you have bill complaints or anything like that, we can see one of the people at this table. So we believed in natural gas, but certainly I would say it's probably more enviable for many companies to invest in the U.S. Today in energy infrastructure. I think that's probably a given, yeah.
Let me turn to some of the questions that have come from the floor, from the audience. A couple of quick ones. How long before the market corrects itself and energy supply, both traditional and conventional, can be ramped up to meet demand?
That's a great question. I'm sorry to say that not very quickly. If you look at the turnaround time, even for the best positioned companies, let's just take the Permian or the Montney, right now things are booked. Like, you need sand, you need water, you need other services. It probably takes a good year for things to ramp up to the spot where things are happening again. But in addition to that, you've got the broader problem of supply chains. So unfortunately, I don't think it's going to turn around anytime soon. And remember, when you have a major supplier, whether it's OPEC or Russia or the United States, disruption in supply takes time to get reconfigured in terms of where energy gets reflowed. So what's happening in Russia. Where is that energy going to go? How's it going to be sourced? That takes a lot of time to sort out, I think, Brian.
Question: building of pipelines are a hot political issue in the U.S. What are the implications for the reliable, integrated North American energy system?
This is the one thing that I really wish that we could have more collaboration on between the two countries. If we start looking at ourselves as a North American supply source, recognizing this integration that's embedded in the question there, boy, we could be a very powerful trading bloc for energy. And I think in most cases, unfortunately, we're still trying to figure out how to, we've got the Line 5 issue, we've got all kinds of other discrepancies between two countries. Generally, we're very good partners. Obviously, we've been friends for a very long time, but certainly more coordinated policy integration around energy in order to feed the rest of the world, I think would be a good idea.
Now, I got to tell you, the U.S. Consul General told me earlier when I mentioned Line 5, she said, what? Unmentionable.
Well, that's good. I guess.
It's all resolved, right? No problem. Question, what can government do to help the energy industry meet Canada's climate change commitments? What can government do to help the energy industry meet Canada's climate change commitments? That sort of goes with, hi, I'm from Ottawa, I'm your friend, the check's in the mail. Go ahead.
The industry, just to reiterate what I said up there, the industry is focused on this. The one thing I think that government can do, as usual, is provide the right policy framework and especially incentivization around new energy technologies. I think that can be a good role for government. And then the capital will flow. Industry will put capital to work. So I think that's probably the main thing. And remember, in terms of carbon capture, let's give the government credit. They just implemented through the budget a carbon capture and incentive tax credit. That's going to be very helpful in moving things along and giving industry some surety. And then I said, I think the capital will flow. In addition to that, more clarity on ability to permit and get through regulatory process.
Two more quick questions, and of course the budget contains some capital to allow Indigenous communities to participate, as you are doing already in Alberta. So the last two questions, what keeps you optimistic about the future given the state of the world? And you've got 40 seconds to answer that.
Okay, best resources, lowest cost, focused on emissions. We have the whole package here. There's no doubt about that. We've got the know-how and skills. We're every bit as good as anybody in the world in this country when it comes to developing energy sustainably and at the lowest cost.
Last question, and this one, if you can answer this, you'll impress the entire room. But before I ask you this question, I got to tell you that I was once giving a speech in Calgary in the middle of Edmonton being in the finals. And I assumed the audience in Calgary would be really happy to hear what was happening in the game. So in the middle of my speech, someone passed me a note saying that Edmonton had just gone ahead, and I thought, this will get a lot of applause. I said, by the way, I'm just going to pause my speech to tell you, Edmonton, I was in Calgary, Edmonton's leading by a goal. 400 people booed me. So with that warning, here's the last question that came from the floor.
Okay.
Who's going to win, Flames or Oilers?
Oh boy. I just as a reminder, I'll make this short. We have a very large office in Edmonton. A lot of employees. It's going to be a tough series. I'll give the edge. I'm not a politician, so I will say that
you're showing flashes of it. I got to tell you,
the Flames should edge it out.
Oh, there it is. You got a prediction.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good job.
Okay.
It's hard to walk in heels, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just say that much.
So thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Tanya Van Biesen. I'm an executive member of the Canadian Club of Toronto. Delighted to be here today. And Al, thank you very much. As a proud Calgarian myself and Canadian and parent, frankly, and what I'd like to think is a reasonably global citizen, I was heartened by what you talked about today. I can't imagine that the last 10 years as CEO of Enbridge have been easy. I was reflecting on your remarks, thinking if only you could do a speaking tour to elementary and high school students around this country to give them some hope that actually our energy industry in this country is so vital to Canadians, to our economy, but also the work that you're doing with the know-how that you have in your company to bring us to a renewable, sustainable future is so critical. And I think that that story is not told well enough across this country. It's not well enough understood, particularly by young people. So if we can put you on a high school tour, we might just do that. You have shared, both of you actually, in this conversation with Brian. One of the things I wanted to raise, it was raised by Kent in the opening remarks, and I wanted to touch on it again because it wasn't as much present in the conversation, is the work you're doing with Indigenous peoples in Canada, the work that you are doing to advance all kinds of diversity and inclusion in this country is critical. And so I want to salute you for that, and you know you have a special place in my heart for that, so I want to thank you for that, because I think that's part of the S of ESG. Obviously you're carrying the torch on the E, but that's part of the S, so that's critical too. And I think that's the other message to the world, is that our energy industry is not only clean and affordable and sustainable, but it's sustainable from a human perspective, which is critical when you look at other countries that are in this game. Brian, thank you. We have admired your political leadership for many years, and now as a banker, we admire that too. And BMO also has a special place in my heart, so thank you for being here today. We appreciated your comments, your thoughtful questions, and drilling right into what a banker is interested in its investments, so we appreciated that. So before we close, I would like to invite all of you, as David said, your ongoing support of the club is critical, so we would like to encourage you to attend our final few events of the year. We have one on May 26th, when a distinguished panel from Purolator, Ontario Centre of Innovation, and Rogers for Business will talk about whether Canada is fit for growth and why being digital is simply not enough. So we hope you can join us. And then on Wednesday, June 1st, this actually will be another in-person thing, so you can put on your heels. National Inuit leader Natan Obed for a conversation on creating prosperity, improving well-being, and building a Canada in which all Inuit can thrive. So again, with the club's gratitude, I would like to thank our sponsors, ACON and EY. And I would also like to conclude by thanking our AV supplier, Van Valkenburg Communications, and livemeeting.ca for making it possible for all of us, whether you are here in person or virtually, to be here today. So members and guests, thank you for being here, and take care, and of course, stay safe. Thank you.